On April 10th, 2019, I would say my life changed for a long time. I was walking from my office, which is in the Chambers building, to the Senate of Canada building. And as I was walking, I slipped and fell on ice. And I remember it was around noon. I fell in front of the cenotaph. I remember seeing a lot of military police officers who were there getting ready for the changing of the guard. And they rushed over to me, and I said, "Help me up, and I'll be on my way." And I remember one of the young men saying to me, "Ma'am, if you can't get up on your own, then you should allow us to call an ambulance for you." The next thing I knew, I was being put into an ambulance, being rushed to an emergency room at a local hospital in Ottawa. I remember very distinctly that it was a 10-hour wait. And I remember when I was sitting there for the 10 hours, of course my mind was wandering. And as an academic, I started doing what I call participant observation. I noticed that most of the people who were in emergency that day were elderly, were poor, were racialized. And I also noticed that most of the patients, as they were leaving, I could hear the doctor giving them the same prescription, a cocktail of Tylenol and Advil. I was so relieved when it was finally my turn to get in to see the doctor. I'd had an x-ray of my shoulder, which was very painful. And I remember going in to see the doctor. The doctor looked at the x-ray and basically said, "Oh, it's just lightly bruised. You'll be fine. You should be fine in 4 or 5 days." And he gave me a prescription of Tylenol and Advil. I remember thinking to myself, this is the same prescription that I have seen every patient leave here with in the last 10 hours. And I'm sure we don't all have the same problem. But I was trusting. I trusted the doctor. I took a taxi to my hotel. The next morning, I took a taxi to the airport and went home. And I took the Tylenol and the Advil. The doctor said I should be fine in a few days, and I tried to will myself to feeling better. But 2 weeks later, I was in so much pain that I could barely move. But I still traveled to Ottawa to work. I still did everything that I would normally do because the doctor said my shoulder was only bruised and I should be okay. And then, as I said, on this second week of unbelievable pain, I had my husband pick me up at the airport in Halifax when I returned from Ottawa. And I had him pick me up, and I said, "I'm not going home. You have to take me to the emergency at the Dartmouth General because I believe that there's something very seriously wrong with my shoulder. I fear that it's broken." So he did take me. I told him not to wait for me, but of course he did. He waited with me. It wasn't quite as long a wait. I think we may have waited 4 hours. But I noticed something different from my previous experience. They had me put on a Johnny shirt. They did x-rays, and then the doctor physically examined me. And that's when I realized that the doctor in Ottawa had not even physically examined me. I had not taken off my clothing at all. And so all these things are playing in my head over and over and over. And then the doctor gives me the news. I do indeed have a fracture on my shoulder, but because I had been using my shoulder for the past 2 weeks, instead of having it immobilized in a sling, I had done more damage. And we later found out Months later, we found out that I had a tear in my rotator cuff. And in addition to that, I had frozen shoulder, all because of the misdiagnosis and the mistreatment when I first injured myself. I thought long and hard about what I should do, about what had happened in Ottawa. How should I deal with that? At the end of the day, we choose our battles, and I chose not to do anything about it. But I'm telling this story now because I believe very strongly that had I received more culturally responsive, more culturally sensitive care when I first had that fall, I would not have suffered for the 3 years that I did, and I would have just done better had I received better care. When I think about culturally responsive care, I see it as the baseline of care that every patient should receive, that every patient deserves. And I'm very grateful that I've been able to get much better care at the Dartmouth General Hospital.